Hello, you're listening to On Israel in Al Monitor. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. In his desperate efforts to cling to power, Benjamin Netanyahu is now pushing for a change in Israel's electoral system. He wants Israelis to vote directly for the prime minister of their choice, rather than having to come up with sufficient Knesset support to form a government, which he has failed to do after 4 elections in 2 years. The idea is perfectly legitimate, although Israel tried it in the past and eventually dropped it and went back to the current system. What Netanyahu is suggesting means changing the rules mid-game. With the deadline for his 4th attempt to form a government just 1 week away, Netanyahu has decided that rather than allowing his opponents to take a crack at forming a government, as existing law dictates, he would change the law and appeal directly to the people. His idea doesn't stand much of a chance, but it reflects the intensity of the crisis rocking Israeli politics. Israel prides itself on being the only true democracy in the Middle East, but that boast is looking increasingly hollow. The state's law enforcement authorities and media are under persistent siege by Netanyahu and his allies. The Prime Minister himself has been charged with bribery for allegedly granting regulatory benefits to a media tycoon in return for positive coverage of himself and his family. But Netanyahu personally still enjoys significant popularity compared to other potential candidates. Is Israel on an unavoidable path to a 5th election? Can the bloc of Netanyahu's opponents, who span the political spectrum from the political right of Naftali Bennett all the way to the left of Arab lawmaker Mansour Abbas, form a government without Netanyahu? After 12 consecutive years of political magic, does Netanyahu have any rabbits left to pull out of his frayed sleeve? Our guest today is a leading Israeli political correspondent. Tal Schneider knows the ins and outs of Israeli and American politics. She was the Ma'ariv newspaper's Washington correspondent. She studied journalism and photojournalism in Washington and is considered a digital journalism pioneer. Schneider wrote an influential political blog for years. She was the diplomatic political correspondent for the Financial Daily Globes and currently works for the Times of Israel news site and presents the primetime evening news on the independent Democrat TV channel. Tal Schneider will be with us here after this short break.
If you're listening to this podcast, you obviously care about the Middle East, and if you do, you should probably be reading Al Monitor. Al Monitor is a global newsroom headquartered in Washington, D.C., with a network of over 160 contributors around the world. Al Monitor offers first-class reporting and analysis from a range of perspectives and an approach that represents the highest journalistic standards, as well as an award-winning commitment to press freedom and independence. If you haven't done so already, visit us at almonitor.com, check out our articles, and sign up for our free newsletters. There's a lot to choose from, including the Week in Review, an essay that offers unusual insights and forecasts into the region based upon Al Monitor's outstanding reporting. And if you haven't done so, please subscribe to our Al Monitor podcast on your favorite podcast platform, on Israel with Ben Caspit and on the Middle East with me, Andrew Parasolidi.
Now I am pleased to say hello and shalom to my colleague and friend Tal Schneider. Shalom, Tal.
Hi, Ben.
Hi. So let's dive into business, and I first like to start with your experience of U.S. politics. How similar are the anti-democratic trends we saw in the waning days of the Trump presidency, including the storming of Capitol Hill, and the developments in Israel in what seems to be the sunset of the Netanyahu era?
I don't think it's really the same. I believe that in Israel, the democracy is very fragile, but yet violence is not an option, not if it is led by the government. I mean, we do see a lot of violence here in the region, but we usually don't see violence led by the leader itself. So, I mean, it feels as if what we've seen on the Capitol on January 6th will not repeat here in the Israeli Knesset. I don't see that.
Why? Because we see the pro-Netanyahu demonstrations very small, dozens of people and not thousands, because here and there I see a lot of violence, a lot of, the slogans, they're calling the leftist, the anti-Netanyahu protesters, they are being called traitors. Don't you fear that something can ignite the Netanyahu supporters and send them to the Knesset? You don't see it coming?
Well, I definitely think that if we will have a left and center, maybe a unity government that will comprise also the left and the center, I definitely think we will see lots of demonstrations, more demonstration coming from the right wing. You are right to say the right wing has been very quiet as per demonstration in recent years. They've been violent using violent terms. They've been violent by protesting in front of people who are, families of war heroes in front of their houses, but they never managed to get much crowds and much followers. But, storming the Knesset seems to me out of the question. I think the Israeli Guard and the Israeli, the way the police is handling things in the area of the institution is not the same. But definitely we will see lots of demonstrations against the government for anything that will happen. And you will see the Likud sending out lots of demonstrators out to the streets everywhere in Israel.
Yes, I think we're starting to see it now. By the way, you reminded me after you mentioned just now that cursing and shouting at war heroes' families, whatever President Trump did, how he mocked late Senator John McCain. So we see resemblance, but the bottom line, you don't think that the storming of the Capitol can be repeated here in Israel, and I think I agree with you. I want to go to politics. Netanyahu admitted last week that he does not have the required Knesset majority for a government, and he's trying to organize now direct elections to stay in power. What are the prospects of such an idea, and how legitimate is being perceived in the political arena? We've seen that it has quite a bit of public support.
Well, I think this is not an option and it will not happen. Netanyahu is trying to change Israel's basic clause and Israel, semi-constitution for any matter that will assist him personally. But it doesn't give the Israeli public a straight answer. What will change if you will change the system? So he's trying to change the system, but every time he is not on the winning side, because as we know, for four cycles, he's not able to win. And I don't think that changing the system will grant him more power, because it doesn't suggest to have a different compromise of the Israeli Knesset, the 24th Knesset. The only thing that's on the table is another kind of personal vote that will just waste more money and time for the Israeli people. And I don't see any majority for that. If he had a majority to change those basic laws, then he would have a government by now. Once he doesn't have a government, it can also change those basic laws. It's the same. So this is just a waste of time. It's a spin. It was mentioned by some of his loyalist ministers, Aryeh Deri, but not, I was asking Aryeh Deri all of those questions and he had no answers for them. So it's just, it was just a way to pass another week with the man where he knows he doesn't have a majority to form a government.
I think my impression is a bit different, because I see Netanyahu trying to go ahead with this idea and pressing forward, because he thinks that if it will be a personal election, neck to neck between him and Yair Lapid, the gap will be a lot more significant than the eternal tie between the 61 anti-Netanyahu and 59 pro-Netanyahu, and maybe he's also counting on the Arab voters not to come to vote for Yair Lapid or a different candidate from the left. And maybe Netanyahu is desperate now. Maybe he's taking it more seriously than many analysts, including yourself.
But Ben, if you open up an election, let's say it's a direct vote and anyone can run. So what's stopping Bennett and Gideon Sa'ar to run as candidate for prime minister? And then the right-wing vote will split. And who will be the winner in that option? I mean, this is just crazy stuff. And Netanyahu is trying to change the system instead of being able to rule in this country. And it doesn't have a majority to change the system. In order to change the system, you need power. It doesn't have the power. And from what I'm hearing, this option is not on the table at the moment.
Okay, let's move on maybe to the other side. And I want to ask you, Tal Schneider, can the so-called bloc of change form a sustainable, stable government? After all, it includes complete opposites such as Bennett, Gideon Sa'ar, and Avigdor Lieberman on the right, and ideologues like Merav Michaeli and Nitzan Horowitz on the left.
So right now we are in those very subtle and gentle days of the last days of Netanyahu's mandate, and anything can happen in this week before Netanyahu finish up his mandate on May 3rd or May 4th. And in those days, Netanyahu will, try to pull all of the tricks or other, options he has. And if you're talking about the change government, it seems very unlikely. And people on the change side, this is Yair Lapid, Merav Michaeli, Nitzan Horowitz, and so on, they are worried that Bennett is actually using them in order to get his price high and get something better from the Likud. So if you talk to people from those parties, MKs, they will tell you that they are, they can't even trust their own potential prime minister, Naftali Bennett. They think that this is only a maneuvering. And Netanyahu can maybe also try to maneuver his own party while putting someone, I call it a puppet government, or some people call it the Medvedev-Putin option, where Netanyahu will try to put a person on the front from his loyalists, and in that way form some sort of a government with Gideon Sa'ar from New Hope. So Bennett may be just trying to get his price up by working and negotiating with the other side, and we will end up next week with this Medvedev-Putin situation, which I'm not sure it will happen, but it's on the table.
Yes, and the name that is being mentioned in this regard is Yariv Levin, a very close Netanyahu loyalist. He's right now is the Speaker of the Knesset, and Yariv Levin, according to his immediate followers, saying in this weekend, he's not going to even to consider this option. By the way, I think Gideon Sa'ar is saying what we call in closed circuits conversations, that if it will be someone he counts on, like maybe Nir Barkat, Yuval Steinitz, or even Israel Katz, he can consider joining such a government if Netanyahu is not the prime minister. So this can happen, but I think if it will happen in maybe the last 2 days of the Netanyahu mandate, and we are not there yet. I want to ask you, Tal, after 2 stormy years without a functioning government, without a budget, constant bitter fighting, and a prime minister under criminal indictment, do you believe Israel is still a healthy democracy in 2021?
Well, it's definitely not a healthy democracy at the moment, and specifically with the budget, which is a major issue. I think no democracy can function without a budget. It is, we are in a constitutional crisis like we have never known, and I don't see the pathway out, because even if Netanyahu is forming some sort of a puppet government, or even if the change bloc is forming a different government, I do believe this will not stick for a long time. And after maybe a short while of a year, or maybe a little bit less, it might dissolve. And it's another sign of dysfunctioning system. I don't believe in change of rules. Maybe the country needs a reform in government reform, but definitely not a whole change of the method. And people are suggesting a change of the method, but it will have to be examined very closely, that, in a way that we don't enter into another spiral situation where we are out of control.
Do you think the rift between Netanyahu's supporters and his opponents, which is also evident on the media map, can be healed once he leaves office? Is Bibism, like Trumpism, here to stay, or can we begin a healing process once he's gone?
It's here to stay as long as Netanyahu is behind the scene pulling, all of the strings. If he is, not really stepping down and making his own time to deal with his criminal charges, then it's here to stay. It's here to stay, to my opinion, until the trial will be done, either by acquittal or by conviction. Either side, it may take, we don't know, 4 to 5 years until the end of the appeal. So as long as the trial is going on, we are with the Bibism, and we are here with this, local Trumpism that we have here. Only after Netanyahu's days, when his days will be final, and I mean after the final appeal, only then maybe we will be able to see something else. But, I'm not really sure.
So after saying all that, will you support a plea bargain that maybe will not send Netanyahu to jail, but end this affair and send him away of the political system?
I definitely don't support a plea bargain at the moment. I think the charges are so severe, and this needs to go through the system all the way to the end. Netanyahu has claimed that he is innocent, and people on the other side, obviously they charged him, the Attorney General and the Israel's prosecution, they charged him. They did not, if they think that he had some slight of getting out of it innocence, they would not put the charge on. So if they decide to go with that, we should see the full trial all the way to the end. And, what's interesting to me is, I think on the first month of the trial, the Alovich family, the husband and the wife, Shaul and Iris, I think they took a huge blow, because the evidence against him seems to be really bad. And they will need to cross-examine the witness, Ilan Yeshua. But having said that, things that Ilan Yeshua proved with recordings and written testimonies were so bad for them on many aspects, that I would expect this couple to consider a plea bargain. And if
and the victim of this plea bargain can be Netanyahu himself.
Exactly. If they will, if they're getting good advice at the moment, they should definitely step back immediately and start. I mean, Shaul Alovich is almost 80 years old. Does he want to spend 10 years in jail, or does he want to be a person out of jail maybe a year? Or so if they will
we have here a double meaning to the slogan, the verdict is not out yet.
Yeah, definitely. And if they will do something like that, the plea bargain may include a testimony from them, because the Attorney General may demand that they will go on the stand and the public will hear what this couple has been doing. And if that will happen, I would be very, very worried from,
because
from the side
of Netanyahu. Most of our listeners are Americans, so let's just say that the Alovich family, the husband and the wife, were the owners of the Bezek conglomerate, and they are charged with bribery charges with Netanyahu. They supposedly got from Netanyahu the regulatory benefits by billions, and in return they allegedly gave him to control a major media news outlet named Walla. And this is actually the heart or the core of the file 4,000 against Netanyahu. Now let's talk a minute about the United States, a place you know very well. To what extent is the alienation between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu regime real? If he remains in power, could Netanyahu find his way to Biden's heart and influence the nuclear agreement with Iran?
Well, I think the Biden administration is sitting on the bench, as you may call it, or in waiting, because they have an election or an ongoing election in Israel. They have an ongoing or maybe election in the Palestinian Authority, and they also have election in Iran in June, I think, or May. So they are sitting, and they're not waiting. They're not wasting any time on the enrichment front. But other than that, they try to be careful from the Israeli-Palestinians politics, as long as we don't know if there are elections in the Palestinians Authority and what is the outcome of the fourth election in Israel. So we saw a really cool approach from Biden, not talking to Netanyahu for a whole month and then talking to him briefly after a month. And since then, we don't see any connection, expect maybe on intelligence and military side, but definitely not administration to administration. Biden definitely have a more acute and urgent problems. China, is a big component of that. Obviously, Russia and Iran. So it puts Netanyahu on hold. Why engage with him if Netanyahu may not be the prime minister pretty soon, or if Netanyahu is the interim prime minister until a fifth election?
Yes, I think I agree with this. Let's talk about actually another question about the administration. Does the administration want to see Netanyahu replaced, in your opinion, since the only realistic replacement is named Naftali Bennett, who is more of a right-wing ideologue than Netanyahu? How concerned is the Biden administration, in your opinion, about such a development?
Well, I think they may be concerned specifically on the annexation issue. Having said that, Bennett yesterday, or on Friday actually, said it on his Facebook page, we're not going to do any annexation or two-state solution whatsoever if we're going to have this changed government. And we do know that the Americans are following very, very closely. So they do understand that if Bennett is the leader for the next 2 years, then he will be attached to a lefty and liberals and centrist politician, and he will not be able to do whatever he wants. So I don't think they have any reservation against Bennett as a person. I do think that they are very worried from the rise of the Kahanist, Itamar Ben-Gvir and Avi Maoz, which are probably more compared to the American alt-right, even the violent alt-right. And this is an issue of concern. And if that would be included, if they would be included in a Netanyahu coalition, I have a feeling that this would be maybe a point of tension between the sides, but probably not a public tension, maybe like behind the scene concern.
Yes, this is a good and important point.
I just want to remind the listeners that Ben-Gvir's partner, Michael Ben-Ari, a former MK, is still on the terror list of the State Department in the United States.
I forgot it.
Last time I've checked.
I just forgot it.
He was banned from entry to the United States when he was an MK, when he was a member of the Knesset in 2012. And since then, I don't think they took him off the terror list.
It is worth checking, and I will do, and I believe you will do as well. You will check it as well. Is the ongoing distancing of the Democratic Party from a more conservative and right-wing Israel at all reversible?
It is reversible. And even Bennett, which is maybe the next prime minister of Israel, is fully aware of that. And he, as a diaspora minister and as education minister, he was still in a party that was controlled by some rabbis, ultra-Orthodox rabbi from the settlers movement. And he was well aware of his inability to discuss freely with the reform movement and the democratic sides, which is, you may say, attached or arranged together with the reform movement. He was well aware of that, and he did not try to solve that, as he wasn't prime minister. But if he becomes a prime minister and he's no longer obliged by those rabbis, the settler rabbis, because he's new party is not obliged to them. I do believe that he is fully aware to the consequences of this rift and what can happen. So,
Yes, I like you. I think when you become a prime minister, you I think Ariel Sharon also once said, things you see from here, you didn't see from there. So you become a totally different person, more responsible, etc.
And definitely, if we talk about his partner, Yair Lapid, who has really warm relationship with the Democratic Party and with the reform movement, so it's a different game. Of course.
Final question, Tal Schneider, about freedom of speech and this situation of the media, the free media in Israel. You are now anchoring the daily news program in what we call Democrat TV. It's a totally independent media outlet, a brand new one, with a lot of hopes. While we're seeing, maybe I can use the word annexation of many other media organizations and outlets by Netanyahu and his government. What do you think about our future here in Israel as a democratic state and as independent journalists?
Thank you. First of all, indeed, Democrat TV is a free and not attached media set up on Facebook and by the Darkenu organization, and it has a lot of followers. I think BJ is evolving, and I'm very worried about the corruption charges against the prime minister, and even places that are not part of the charges against Netanyahu with respect to corruptions seems to be taken by him in some means, and it is worrisome. But I do think that the Israeli media scene is going through, how do you say that? A process, maybe more of a tantalizing process. I'm more worried for the freedom of speech for the demonstrations, I have to tell you, because I think we've been through a year of the pandemic, and we've seen the government actually putting forward bills to outlaw demonstrations. And this is, the demonstrations were held in a very limited way for 2 weeks, and I think that was a devastating step. It's much more dangerous to me when the government is outlawing demonstration than the media and the reporters' freedom of speech, because we have our freedom of speech and we will always have it. But people that want to protest on the streets, sometimes they don't have the strength of the media, and they just want to cry out, And that was, to me, one of the worst weeks in this year of pandemic. It's very undemocratic, and I was watching the government from apart, saying to myself, how can this happen in Israel?
And it happened. Tal Schneider, it was fascinating. I thank you very much for joining us here on Israel in Al Monitor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Ben. It's a privilege to be here. Bye.
We'll go bye-bye on a short break and be right here back with some final thoughts. Wait for us.
I'm Andrew Parasolidi, president of the award-winning media news site El Monitor, where we cover the Middle East with some of the best reporters and columnists anywhere. And I'm excited to announce our new podcast, On the Middle East, where each week I will interview newsmakers from the U.S. and the region about the latest news and trends with additional commentary from our on-the-ground correspondents. Those of you who follow the region know that what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. And to cite another great movie line, every time the U.S. tries to get out, the region pulls us back. Your time is valuable, so let me promise you this. You will learn something and you will never be bored, because each week we'll be talking with and listening to those leaders who are making the news and shaping the trends in this critical and fascinating region. So please subscribe to On the Middle East with me, Andrew Parasolidi.
Thank you for staying with us. Our guest today, Tal Schneider from the Times of Israel, does not see a lot of similarity between the pictures that we saw in Capitol Hill, the storming of Capitol Hill by President Trump's supporters, and what is going on right now in Israel. The Israeli political chaos is wild, but it lacks, in Tal Schneider's opinion, the mass, the critical mass and the energy, and maybe also the level of violence that we saw in Capitol Hill. These events cannot happen in Israel, in her opinion. When asked about the option that Netanyahu is trying to invent for himself right now, changing the system to direct election, changing the rules of the game in mid-game, Schneider thinks it's not really on the table, it's illogical, it cannot happen. Politically, it's impossible to change the rules of the game in mid-game in Israel, and Prime Minister Netanyahu will not be able to collect enough votes in the Knesset. He needs 61 in order to do it. Schneider was Ma'ariv's Washington, D.C. bureau chief for years, and she covered all the last election campaigns in the United States, and she don't think that we are going to see a huge clash between the Biden administration and Netanyahu, supposedly if Netanyahu is going to stay in power. She says that the Biden approach is cool. He is on the bench. He has a lot more acute problems than Israel and the Palestinians. He looks for China, for Russia, all these issues before engaging with Netanyahu. And he doesn't know if Netanyahu is here to stay. So why engage with this prime minister that can cause only trouble to the American president, as we saw with President Obama right now? When I ask her about the relationship, the fragile relationship between the more conservative and right-wing Israel and the Democratic Party, she said that this crisis in the relationship is reversible. Even if Naftali Bennett, who is a right-wing hawk, is going to be the next prime minister of Israel, she said that Bennett knows very well the Jews in the United States. He was minister of diaspora Jews. He was minister of education. He will be able, when he comes into the prime minister's chambers, he will not be obliged anymore with the rabbis that controlled him in the previous stage when he was in the Mafdal. So he will be a prime minister, and he will be able to engage to the Reform Judaism and to the Democratic Party. He knows very well the importance of these issues, and she is not pessimistic on this, and I am glad. I hope we found this today's podcast interesting, and I hope to find you here the same place, the same time on Monday on Israel in Almoni Torah. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Take care.